Welcome to the Wisdom of Show. I'm your host, Simon Bowen, and every week I'm speaking to the world's greatest leaders, thinkers, and entrepreneurs about complex issues and impactful leadership. Join us in the Renaissance of Wisdom. So, welcome to the Wisdom of David Kenney, and I've had the pleasure of having had a chat with David as research for a book that I want to write, and I just had to have him on the show as a guest. You know, we live, as I keep saying, in an increasingly complex world, politically, socially, economically. There's a lot going on around the world right now, and we also live in a world where people are looking oftentimes for shallow, superficial solutions to things. They're looking for quick tips, tricks, and hacks. And success usually comes from deeper, wiser thinking behind everything that's going on. It's these purveyors of wisdom, this authentic genius that we're bringing to the show to hopefully help people get a deeper sense of what's possible, but also what's some of the thinking that might go on behind the thinking. We want to unpack these complex issues and these challenges and ideas and projects through the lenses of people that have actually done the things and not just studied the things. And today, David is one of those people that has advised many people. He's the founder of StartGrowth. I love this line, David. I mean, the thrilling journey through mastering, financial services. I'm not sure that everybody views accounting and financial services thrilling. However, it is the drumbeat of everything that most of us do. You know, there is a currency that measures everything. But I love this line about help raising an eye-watering amount of capital and confronting the challenges involved in that. And lots of people are in the business of trying to launch businesses and raise capital, or even, borrow their own money or inject their own capital into it. You've been a founder in various ventures. You do a lot of work with startups and helping startups and help businesses to build and scale. And you're a puzzle master. You like solving problems with innovation and growth, and solving problems with finding and keeping talent, and what are the right questions, what are the right things to unpack. There's so much background in your story, from some fairly challenging financial circumstances as a child growing up, through what you're doing now, and the kind of, I think it was about $1 billion in capital you helped raise through one part of your career, and big ventures and things like that. I'd love you to share a bit more background for people so they know how to find you and they have a sense of who David is. And then I'll dive into some questions that we've got ready to go.
Okay, well, thanks very much for having me, Simon. One of the things that really triggered me with what you said about accounting, and very early on, I decided accounting is not the thing. Understanding capital is so important.
Yeah.
And it was almost on week one of my career where people said, you need to be allocated to this person. And he spent, I reckon, 5 minutes tapping his calculator, and I thought, this is not good. I've made the wrong career decision. This is week one. I thought, you can't quit, in 1 week. But then I met some other people who I thought, this is what it's all about, is actually understanding how to take some money and turn it into something. And understanding how to build and hire people, what to do before people will believe you're worth backing, what needs to happen after you've done the raise, etc. And that's capital allocation. It's actually working out the story and working out, where to start and who you need and what skills you need, and then with those skills, what are the people you need, and then being able to articulate that is really, if you think about it, so that's capital allocation. It might be to maybe the untrained eye, it might be accounting, saying, okay, we're going to have a budget and we're going to have a business plan, but it's actually capital allocation, because that's what people are really driven by, to see how well do people understand capital allocation. They might not say it, they might not articulate it, they might not even think it, but when they see it done well, it's an absolute sight to behold. And so that's what I've really been dedicating the last 20 years of getting better at, is capital allocation, how that fits together.
It's super interesting. I've interviewed people with financial backgrounds and accounting backgrounds in the past, and it might just be the people I hang out with, but every single one of them's gone, yeah, I studied accounting and then I started my first job. And I went, oh my goodness, I've made a bad choice here. Right. And then in the corporate world, I spent a fair bit of time in the corporate world as an executive leader. And everyone that's not in finance talks about the bean counters, right?
Mm.
And we dismiss this a little bit, but listening to people like you and others, what I've come to realize is, for a start, don't get into business if you don't want to understand the money, right? But it's almost the difference between, are your accounting practices and financial management practices about counting the money, or are they about working the money? And when I've talked to people like you who started their careers in financial fields, they always articulate something about working the money. So as you say, capital allocation. I mean, one of the hardest, not hardest, but one of the most important lessons I learned as a young executive leader with one of Australia's very large companies was how to put up a good capex, that would get to the board and get funding. And all they were interested in was, how hard are we going to work that capital if we spend the money in your business unit, right? You had to be able to figure that argument out. And I'm interested in what inspired you to actually start the journey, maybe not even after that first week, but in the business world. Where did that come from? I mean, early life, was it experience as a child? You're an entrepreneur,
Well,
you're a business person. What started that journey?
um, well, I think that I worked out pretty early that the most successful people can actually communicate well.
Right.
And in business, you're selling either capital to investors, the dream to customers, or a better future for your team. So in some way, shape, or form, getting good at communication was something I really thought, that's the thing I'm going to focus on.
Mm.
And being able to blend, unit economics and metrics and all that sort of stuff, and how to hire and how to run, numbers in your head that are starting with a certain pot of dollars that you've got to get the following things done before you run out, and what the inflows and outflows are going to be, without using a spreadsheet and being able to do that in your head and thinking, is this the right plan? That became a focus, but more importantly, working out what the pieces were that I needed. So who did I want to work with? Who did I need to hire? What were we going to offer? Did I have the right people? Could they communicate? And so my very first job was selling orange juice door to door, where I call that my first subscription business, because I literally had to sell to people. You get out of a car with 12 other kids in a van. Sounds like you wouldn't be able to do that these days. And you go
It
knocking.
sounds like child labor.
Yeah, it might be 7:30 at night, and I'm knocking on someone's door, and saying, "Would you like to buy a 52-week subscription for orange juice, where you can't get out of the contract? That's 12, 52 consistent weeks where you're agreeing to buy something." And I was very good at that, and because I connected with people and asked some questions, rather than saying, "Here's what we've got, here's what we do, here's what it costs." No one really cared. And I don't know, just intuitively, I thought this was an opportunity to practice with getting to see how people think and what they did. And then I got flown down to Melbourne to train other kids.
Now, how old are you at this stage?
14.
So, and this is for a company, right?
Yeah, yeah. And then unfortunately, my stepfather, almost didn't speak to me for 2 weeks when we went over to Fiji, and I started negotiating with the vendors, buying things, and they go, "Dude, you can't do that. You can't." Anyway, I just came naturally having a conversation about having fun and being respectful. But I don't know, and then he said, "You need to be a chartered accountant because they inherit the earth." I didn't know what that meant, but I thought I'd give it a go. And
Yeah.
luckily discovered some smart people that were good original early examples, not necessarily mentors, because I don't think anyone really mentored me. Just had to work it out on my own to say, what do people really need, and how do you build companies? Because there's only two ways people really get wealthy in Australia, and that's building companies and investment in properties.
Yeah.
You can invest in share markets, of course, but someone else is building those companies.
Yeah. So you said two things that I just want to tap in on before we push on with some other questions. One was, you worked out pretty early that successful people communicate well.
Hmm.
And, we dismiss communication pretty quickly. Every self-development program's got to has in there, be a good communicator, and every leadership program has, you've got to be a good communicator. But I don't think we really dig into what that means in terms of you've got to be able to influence the choices everybody makes around you to support what you're doing. Banks to
Yeah, I
lend you.
think it's a good word. Some influence, and a lot of people don't know how to influence. I'm not talking about people that walk down the street and video themselves and saying, you should buy this. This is what I'm thinking lately. But I think it's connection with people and building trust, and not selling to somebody that doesn't need what you have. It's around understanding their world probably better than they do themselves,
Yeah.
being able to articulate it in a way they haven't heard that before, and still being able to, be set, like invited into the house. Like I'm standing on a doorstep, or I'm standing on a Zoom call, training people to do sales, listening to their scripts and saying, where do you think that went wrong? Knowing there's 7 things I did wrong in a 1-hour call, or even a 10-minute call.
Yeah.
So it's really a question of getting better at communication. So when I had almost 300 people and working with me, for me, not everyone agreed that being able to communicate and train and was the thing. Like, the main thing is working on the main thing. And if you're in a professional services organization, that's the main thing. Everything else is like commodity.
Yeah. Well, if you think about communication, specifically communication from the ability to influence other people, we elect leaders of entire countries entirely on their ability to communicate during a campaign period, and particularly if it's a new leader elected into an office, taking the place of an old one. We some of the world's greatest movements came off the back of great communication. Martin Luther King Jr. was a real problem for the establishment in the day because he was a phenomenal orator and communicator. In fact, it was the only tool he had, and he is a historical figure. So this ability to communicate is just fundamental. You said something else really interesting too, which was, with the Fiji story, be respectful and have a bit of fun.
Yep.
I think business is a full contact sport, and the more playful you become, it seems to me, in sales particularly, but actually in leadership. And I don't mean playful in a silly way, but the more you're having fun, it does seem to me that the more potent you become as an influencer. I'm not sure if that's what you meant when you said have a bit of fun, but it just does seem to be a better place to come from.
Yeah, look, having fun and being funny are two very different things. And a lot of people think they can be funny, and they just definitely can't. But I think that, going back to your comment and weaving that back to your question, but using Martin Luther King as an
Yeah.
example, if Martin Luther King just said, I had a dream, and he said, and he made people, he did influence people, but he actually had a plan too. And he
Yeah.
was able to articulate the plan. So the communication skills, you can be the greatest communicator in the world, but if you don't know what to do with capital allocation, or you don't know how to be a better friend or a better, like, you need perception first to understand where someone is and what the world is, then decide how to communicate, then decide how to do the what, and then what the what is, right? So, and then execute, rather than saying, how would you like to own the world's most valuable company? Great. I don't know how to do that, says the next person. Then they go, oh, well, why did you ask? You've got to back it up. If you can back it up, and you can communicate, and you can understand what their limitations are, it's a really good combination to know where are they, what do they do next, what's holding them back, how do they get the right person to help them with the things that they need help with, and then put all of that together, stand it up, and get them short-term, long-term goals. That's communication. but it's
Yeah.
also business acumen
Yeah.
or capital allocation.
Yeah.
Because capital allocation, I say, is the top of the tree. I've only had one argument with a friend of mine who is a very learned friend, said, no, storytelling is the most important thing. But I said, you had to come up with the story. So that's the use of your time. So
Yeah.
capital allocation is your time, your money, other people's time, other people's money. That's the top of the pyramid.
Yeah. It's interesting in terms of this whole idea about influencing people, the quality of communication, your ability to get a line of sight, depth of thinking.
Mm-hmm.
I hear myself saying it over and over again. Depth of thinking is the only true differentiation in the marketplace. So the quality of your thinking, and in your language, you'd be saying the quality of thinking around that capital allocation at the top of the tree, and then what's possible underneath it, the sense of perception, what's stopping people, understanding that if the price of doing nothing is less than the price of doing something, most people will do nothing. And so being able to work your way through that, that all points to the need to be a deeper, more profound thinker than most people, actually looking at what's going on below the surface.
Yeah.
So are we accounting to count the money, or are we accounting to work the money? And what's the story underneath that? So I'm just wondering whether it's intuitive and natural in you, or it's evolved over time. It's probably a combination of both. But you clearly think a bit deeply about things. If at 14 you're trying to do deals in Fiji on a holiday, there's something else going on there. Were there any pivotal moments that significantly impacted the career and the path you've taken that stand out in your mind? And what was that experience, and why were they pivotal?
Ooh, I don't know. I always thought I was poor. Um, so I go back. In fact, not the first job. The first self-elected job I had was I used to take Manly dailies out of when I was probably 5 years old. This is when you're allowed to walk around the streets and you didn't have to have supervision. Um, and I take Manly dailies out of people's um, letterboxes. That was my local newspaper, and I'd walk up to the door and sell it to them. So cost of goods sold none. And yeah, and you just have fun and you learn
Yeah.
to communicate and say, and someone would think that's funny and they'd say, here's 5 cents, mate. They go, oh, look, I'll let you off. I'll give you a discount today. Uh, so,
So they probably all knew you'd taken it out of their letterbox, and they're just supporting a
absolutely.
5-year-old who's trying
I
to do some
sold them what they
business.
already had that I wasn't allowed to sell, but hey, I'm 5, so I think I'm okay to admit that now. But I don't know. I just think definitely thinking I'm poor.
Yeah.
I can't ask for this or that. Got no money. And I wasn't feeling sorry for myself, but I thought if I want something, I need to work out how to do it.
Yeah. So you've been in you founded StartGrowth.
Mhm.
You've been in the business startup space for quite a while, helping early stage and startup businesses. And that idea of you thought you were poor, and also let's keep this theme of capital allocation. We've had a boom of startup businesses in the last, say, 20 years, right? And I often wonder if some of that frugality and um, best use of capital that always had to be a feature, when anyone started a business, how long before you turn a profit and best use of capital. But it feels to me that and I don't operate in the startup space very much, but it does feel to me like the startup space can have a bit of over expensive capital. We'll go and do another capital raising. We'll burn a lot of money. The burn rates seem to be pretty high sometimes without actually converting to actual revenue. And maybe the best and first example was Amazon went for so long without profit, right? But they had a plan. And I,
Yeah,
I wonder if a lot of startups aren't really thinking that same way. Well, they don't have that idea of, I don't have all the resources I need. I've got to make this work cleverly.
true. But I mean, there are other Australian companies that were, not profitable for a very long time, that are on the Australian Stock Exchange as well.
Hmm.
Um, and I won't name the company, but I used to say this company was never worth as much money as when it wasn't making money, because it was all about what it could do,
Hmm.
and it was growing very rapidly. Um, and sometimes companies are looked at, you know, down to how many people on their email list. That email is worth maybe $10 or something
Yeah.
like that. So you do have to, at some stage, go through the process of making a profit. And there are different people that can take companies from zero to, product to 10 million in ARR and 35 or whatever. And then maybe some people can go all the way through to EBITDA. Others can't. They get bored. They go, I'm the wartime founder that haggles and gets it done until I get to this point. But coming back to why there's more of these people. Obviously, people have had success, but the numbers are still way too low in terms of the success. Over the last 2 decades, more, there's been, I can't tell you how many accelerators and co-working spaces there are globally, not just in Australia, but I'm not so sure that the needle has moved in terms of the success rates. So that's a good question in my mind as to what really does make it succeed. And I think, unfortunately, like most things, you've got to work it out yourself. There's no magic pill. You've got to work it out. If you don't work it out, you run out of money and you close.
When you say the numbers are way too low, why do you say that? So do you is it a case of it's the natural process? 10 start, 7 fail, 3 make it, or are the numbers way too low?
It's probably not that high. 10
No, it's probably not.
Yeah, I would say 9.6 of those 10 fail eventually. Yeah. What's a company? Is it something, bunch of people who get together and decide I want to build something and see if I can get it above the pulpit before I give up, or and I need to find the people to help me build it. Whereas I use that. I love that story about the chicken who found the few grains of wheat and baked some bread, but no one wanted to help them. To that story, I say, if the chicken actually sold the dream a bit better, maybe they all would have helped. But yeah, the numbers are frightening in terms of how many companies in Australia are going broke. I mean, you can't walk down the street without seeing for lease signs, and the number of small business restructures, which are a form of insolvency. Other companies are stats, retail, construction. Like if people don't know someone that's not struggling, then they're hermits.
Yeah.
Everyone knows people that have struggled, and I have my own theories on why that's happening, and there's macroeconomics, micro, et cetera, but there's just deeper reasons for that.
Do you have any patterns you've observed in both the leaders and the companies of the ones that do make it? That obviously there's an attrition rate, but there are some that just make it, and you're in that space. Do you see any patterns that are quickly learnable for people?
I mean, really, they've got to work out what their customer. I mean, okay, so what's quickly? I mean, you said at the very beginning, these time hacks and tricks and stuff like that. I think there are reasons why a third-time founder is more investable, and they've just worked out. They've made all the mistakes on the first one. The second one, hopefully, they've learned some of that and do better. Third, they do better again. Some of them, it's their first company and they work it out. So I think it comes down to the type of person they are, and do they have those critical skills being able to sell? Because a founder in the beginning has to sell. The founder has to understand cash, culture, customers. And if they have no earthly reason and they've left the corporate and they think, oh, it all gets done for me, you work it out. Everything is your job. Everybody has to have a time, a place, a role, and you got to do fast. You got to move fast. You got to work it out. You got to work out, what's the feedback. You've got to learn fast, move things, all that, failing fast stuff. I don't subscribe to. I feel like it's make better bets, or even model some of the better companies and having a really good vision of what you're going after, and reverse engineering that, because it's like building the Harbour Bridge and saying, if I keep just incrementally building from one side and I have no idea how I'm going to land this, I like to say, look at 10 years ahead and then start today, and then go 9, 2, 7, whatever,
Interesting.
Yeah. So forecast, not forecast, forecast. Think about what it's going to look like. I'm going to get there, reverse engineer, anchor what you've learned. I mean, this isn't accounting. This is like capital allocation again. It's like how am I going to build that? What's it going to look like? If I'm going to raise a certain amount of money, how much do I need to deliver that? But then, can I legitimately be worth 4 to 6 times more if I achieve that? Because that's what it takes. People aren't interested in 50-50 bets, right?
Yeah.
It's not like roulette, where you go, it's a black or red. People are looking at the quality of the bets you make. Are you making big enough bets and taking enough risk and being able to articulate why that's the risk you're taking?
Yeah.
So I don't know what it is, but I think what it is they have curiosity, they have mongrel, so they won't give up. They are good listeners. They perceive things differently. They don't miss the obvious, and they also see the things that no one sees.
Yeah.
So they have intuition on what the customer's life really needs to be. And also the other thing too is they probably have got another person who's ahead of them, who's a really good teacher. Because a lot of people can do something but can't teach. So here's what I did, and you can get like a most brilliant pitch deck that someone else did. That doesn't help you pitch.
No.
Or you can look at, here's the code for this best SaaS tool on the market, and you go, what can I do with that? So you have to work it out yourself.
Yeah.
So that grit is another piece. There's probably 10 things. I actually wrote an article on what the 10 most important things for people to have in their toolbox or traits that I've observed over the last 20 years. I probably haven't changed my mind on that. I forgot I wrote that article.
Well, what is interesting is actually how you started that whole thing. People have a view that they want to make their company investable. For early stage investors. You started by saying, is the founder investable? Yeah. And that is, that's a Warren Buffett thing too. The company's great, but I want to know who I'm giving my money to.
The leaders giving it to a company. A company is just a commercial construct. It's a legal construct. You're giving it to the people that are going to build it.
Yeah. So, anyone that's wanting to access capital, once again, they've got to be able to demonstrate, their ability to use that capital really, really well. But, customers, what did you say? You said customers, cash.
Well, in the beginning, it's probably true. Customers, cash, culture, and creating a differentiated product that solves a problem that is, actually a real world solution to something that's, like it's a thing. Lots of people build something, but it's not a thing. It's not going to be a thing. Or they can't articulate and take it along the journey. So they've got to be able to explain price. I can't tell you how many people, and in fact, I just had a conversation with 2 of my co-founders not 10 minutes ago about price. And they both disagree with me, and I explain why I think we should do something differently. They go, okay, we get price. So price is one of the most strategic things that you will ever deal with.
But it's also often the last thing people think about when they're building
a
product to take to market.
They go, well, what's someone else charging? Doesn't matter. What you need to do is you need to say, how do I create? I mean, I've got one of the companies that I've co-founded. We've got, I think it's almost 600 people on the wait list for the product. It's a bloody good product. And it's just now a good product, let alone what we're doing with it, or where it's going.
But the conversation about price is interesting. I have conversations in the work that we do, helping people like codify what is the genius of what they take to the market. We have those conversations to very deep levels, and then usually it's towards the end of it where they say, well, what do you think we should charge for this?
Hmm.
Whereas prices are, and you're exactly right. Well, what are other people charging for this in the marketplace? As opposed to what's the economics you need to have to drive the business and deliver value that can command that kind of price that you want to. I mean, there's lots of ways you can look at this, but I agree with you about pricing. It's an undercooked, um, badly understood dimension of going to market. So this idea of customers, like being able to change a customer's life at a price point that they're happy to pay and at a price point that's going to serve your business really well. Culture, being able to get people to jump in and try and help you to be successful with everything they've got. And cash, being able to control the money in the business and make full use of capital allocation. I mean, it's a really useful formula for a leader to be investable. If you can do
Yeah,
those two
absolutely.
things,
Yeah,
you know,
and without telling them you are, demonstrating you have.
yeah,
Like that's the thing. I'm this, I'm that. Don't tell me that. Show me.
yeah. And then they'll pick up the tones of grit and
Hmm.
mongrel, as you put it, stickability,
Yeah.
you know, the energy and the passion to go with it. So,
And also gravitas too, Simon.
yeah, yeah,
Like people are basically saying, can you sell to not just me? Can you attract a world-class team? Can you articulate to customers what that, Martin Luther King is, I have a dream,
yeah,
and you're going to get this dream. Your transformation will be unrecognizable. You'll be faster, smarter, richer, sexier, whatever the products, promises. And it's, and they go, I'm going to be, but you have to deliver.
yeah. So you've said in the past that entrepreneurship is achievable for everyone. And
I
I'd
believe
love you to
so.
expand on that a little more, maybe before we leave this part of the conversation about being an investable entrepreneur. But entrepreneurship is achievable for everyone. It's quite a big statement. I'd love to unpack that a little bit.
Well, I would go from the people I've mentored
Hmm.
and say I haven't met with someone that hasn't made progress in 1 hour
Right.
through asking the right questions. Because if you tell people, here's what you need to do, and I had a conversation with a friend of mine, Peter Ritchie. He said, who no doubt created some of the best training in the world at McDonald's.
Hmm.
And he said, we don't want entrepreneurs that come and start franchises with us. We want people that follow a process and get trained. In doing so, they become entrepreneurs.
Right.
So it's not like you go, oh, I found an entrepreneur, done, get on with it. Everybody discovers knowledge in a different way, but they learn through asking questions. I mean, Malcolm Gladwell's book, around outliers is great in
Oh, yeah.
saying, you spend 10,000 hours, you become an expert. So Malcolm says you can. I say you can too, but where I diverge maybe potentially from Malcolm is you can spend 10,000 hours or you can spend an hour with a person who gets it that'll save you 9,000 hours.
Yeah.
So once then the people aren't static. They don't say, I currently have no knowledge. Like some of the best companies Australia's ever produced in the tech space, say Atlassian, Canva, they weren't who they are now in the beginning.
Mm.
So they started out and they learned and they got better and they made progress and they got better and better and better. So maybe they had some of the key components that I think is necessary, but being an entrepreneur doesn't mean you get to 10, $100 billion or whatever. It's being able to create a product, get it to market, sell it, satisfy a customer, and get them to keep coming back.
Yeah.
I reckon that is possible for pretty much everyone I've ever. Well, it's certainly possible for everyone I've met.
Yeah. It's interesting. You've triggered a thought for me. When I read Outliers and the whole 10,000 hour thing, or whether it's 7,000 hours, and there's been some debate, is it 10,000 hours or whatever. But
Everyone's different because everyone starts from a certain point.
Correct.
For some, it might be 50 hours because they're already so far down the track. And you ask, what do I use? I use thinking models. So if someone's got a thinking model, so they don't have to go through the whole process, and they already know here's some of the formulas on sales, or here's a thinking model for manufacturing, or here's a thinking model for marketing. It gives you a massive head start. So you don't have to spend as much time, and you can make decisions faster because you know the building blocks.
I want to come back to these thinking models or mental models because we turn complex concepts into visual models that people can use to sell with. So, we take complex products and services, we create a visual model so that the customer buys the model first. So you're a SaaS company selling to mining companies. Let's build a design model that sits behind the software, often retrospectively. All of a sudden, you're turning up in front of the customer saying, if you're going to buy an enterprise solution here, you should be asking the company to show you the design model that sits behind it. Most other SaaS companies won't have a design model. The software development would have gone through a modules-based approach. And all of a sudden, immediately, you're different because you're showing the customer the thinking model before. But the thought you triggered in my mind, and maybe it's an additional thing to this idea of entrepreneurship, when I read Outliers, what actually shouted out at me from the book a between the lines concept, and it really hit me when he was talking about how the Beatles became the Beatles and doing all the 95 days in Germany, playing all the underground bars for 8 hours at a time, and the audience would say, play us a poker, and John would look at Paul, and Paul had no idea what a poker is, but they just they'd play something until the audience sounded like they liked it. And the ice hockey players, and it's the thing that read through to me in that was the willingness to take a risk and step out and try. And maybe it's just triggered this thought. I've got to explore it a bit deeper because it's only just come to me as you talked about entrepreneurship is available to everyone. People might perceive this as negative, but actually risk is available to everybody. And if the risk has enough potential and you're willing to take the risk and you can manage it, success is available to everybody because all success carries risk. And
a lot of people have a different starting point to. Everyone's different, but everyone can become an entrepreneur, in my opinion, if they want to be as well. That's another thing too. Not everyone wants it. And you said that they took risks, and risk is the very definition of this might not sell.
Yeah.
I've invested time, money, effort, and this might not sell. But de-risking entrepreneurship is where it's at.
Yeah.
So being able to draw on thinking models, be able to explain things and get better. And you use the example of a SaaS that has a process behind it. So the question is, in capital allocation, do I spend more time making it more intuitive so I need less ancillary documents, or do I say, well, I need to charge more because I have to have a bigger margin because I know I have an onboarding team, or I have this. So that's thinking through your pricing. That's thinking through how will your customer perceive, use, deliver, how fast do they get to that aha moment, and how will you tell them to explain the product? How will you tell them to tell the stories? What will you tell them they discovered, and give them the insights that they might say, oh, it works. Explain it this way.
Yeah.
Get them to think, get them to promote. Like, I mean, one of the key things that people use or don't use is a net promoter score. But I mean, I'll tell you what, a customer's great, but one that promotes your business is even better. So being able to tell them the stories to tell the other friends and customers, that's something. You don't have to have a document. You just have to have great communication skills.
And so let's talk about mental models and thinking models for a little bit. Charlie Munger is famous for saying, you can understand the whole world through a set number of, I think he had about 80 models or 90 models or something that he said allowed him to understand everything about the world. I'm a big fan of models. Our business is called the models method. We frame complex concepts into frameworks, which are really mental models, but on paper. Are there some, what are your go-to models when you're working with a startup entrepreneur, or even a growth stage entrepreneur, are there any particular go-to models that you hear yourself walking through almost every time with every entrepreneur?
I've got a model for almost everything, from product to hiring to sales to training to raising capital to hiring joining up with co-founders, and just there are sort of thinking. It's just questions. Like I think my favorite, like asking the best questions is always, the unlocker.
Yeah.
If someone is prepared to ask questions, be prepared to be uncomfortable or being, comfortable in the ambiguity as well, and comfortable saying, I'm going to try this, but I'm then going to remember why I tried this rather than just being random and saying, I'm running over here, then I run over here, and I didn't make incremental learnings. And that's part of having a model, being able to anchor. So there's probably nothing that like
No, so
code,
it's some
launching new
interesting.
iterations of product versions, everything I use a model for.
Perfect. And so, we're in different cities, but we could spend an entire meal and probably some nice wine just geeking out on models. I'll explore that a bit deeper with you in a minute. But you're right about questions. The person asking the questions is usually in control of the conversation. And that's not a nuance that people sometimes think about, but the person asking the questions is in control, not the person making the statements or providing the answers. And all the value lives in ambiguity. In the space of the things that we both know, that you and I know, that's a commoditized conversation because we both know it. There's no value in that. The ambiguity where I might know something you don't and vice versa is where all the value lives. And people are not comfortable with ambiguity for the most part. They want everything answered, right? And just to lean in to ask a question when you don't know what the answer is going to be is a skill set. It's facilitation. So if we think about models, not what models you use, but what's your definition of a model? Because you and I are using this language when we both work with models all the time, and we probably use models differently. But if we're talking to somebody who never uses models, how would you define what an actual thinking model is?
I would describe it as a set of questions and tools to break things down to the lowest common denominator so that you're at a source of truth, so that you can then make the next step once you've evaluated, explored, and decided that's the current best version of the truth. And then the next question to get to the next level is through another either set of questions or what you're trying to discover, or what processes you need to test your thesis. So you're constantly going through perception, communication, decision, execution, and following it in that order so that you can reverse engineer to find out where the problem is. So it's just a way, and the reason that's good is because there's known knowledge and there's unknown unknowns. So being able to quickly move through the known knowns so that we don't have to spend time on that. We bring the team along faster so that we can then deal with the unknown unknowns.
Yeah.
And then people who can't facilitate hate meetings, because if you don't have someone who can facilitate in a meeting, people hate meetings.
Yeah.
They go, what's the agenda? We went away, we did this, we did that, came back, nothing happened, because people can't facilitate. Facilitation is a major skill.
It is.
By being able to run a team meeting, keep people on point, keep people focusing on the main thing, get people to share, unpack. And that's, again, I reckon I've got something like 100 thinking models.
Yeah.
And meetings I have a thinking model for as well, because
people
go, I'll just have a meeting. And they go, well, have you been in a good meeting? And they go, oh, what's a good meeting?
Well, facilitation is a superpower. And if you can facilitate expertly, you actually never have to sell. And, I think facilitate comes from facile. It's,
Fascia. Yeah.
yeah, which is
Well,
pulling,
well,
drawing out.
in Italian or French, it's easy. Like fascia, or is easy, and that's what a meeting. That's what communication should be. But most people need a structure,
Yes.
and that's why people hate meetings. There's no structure. There's no outcomes. No engagement. There's no. But that's a skill,
Yeah.
and if you haven't got that skill, shame on your boss. If you have got that skill, that's a really important commodity, and that's people flock to you. Like they
Yeah.
go, that's you have charisma. You make people feel good about what they're doing.
Well,
Uh,
people need, you know, my philosophies around models include the need that a model must give you structure. So a model must frame the thing you're thinking about. And
yeah,
people like boundaries. People don't like a blank sheet of paper. They need to have a frame and structure to operate inside of. But you've got to be able to freestyle inside that frame. You've got to be able to ask great questions, but the frame helps keep you on track, which is what allows you to facilitate effectively, because you can always bring people back, but still allow them to contribute. And you made a really interesting observation about your mental models that a lot of people don't think about when I'm talking to them about models. Models have levels, and often multiple levels. And people will see the surface of a model and go, well, that's it. But it's actually having the ability to get levels below and get to the base, the practical simplicity that sits at the bottom. I mean, anyone listening, I'd encourage you to become absorbed in the world of models and modeling and mental models and frameworks, and then become a powerful facilitator. Uh, because you're right, people flock to you, people follow you, you end up with charisma, even if you're an introvert, and you don't feel like you're a charismatic person. When you speak with that kind of structural efficiency and you know how to use powerful questions, you're really hard to ignore.
well, you're going back to that word easy again. I mean, that's what one of the leaders' main job is, to make it easier for the team to win.
Mm.
So part of the reason why I use thinking models is, I like being in great teams and I like them to win. And so, rather than regurgitating maybe 30,000 conversations I've had, I go, well, I need to be able to summarize it, synthesize it, and be able to get it to be absorbable. So start with a model so that you can demonstrate the known knowns, or the sources of truth and the building blocks. And because if there is a model, people recall it faster too. It's a structure. It's a structure for recall, rather than saying, what was that thing we did? What was that? If it has a structural connection, because one of the ways people remember is by having comparisons, or having a model to say, what's the relationship between this and that?
Mm.
Then once they understand the process or the rationale, they can then apply it faster because they understand how it works. So they're not like a kid or a student cramming, saying, I have to remember all this useless, unstructured data. And you go, no wonder you hated learning, because you didn't have a good teacher.
One of the hidden benefits, hidden secrets of models, you've actually just articulated it. Once a model's well thought through, the primary thinking's done, and then that thinking is given structure and form through a model that has multiple levels to it. The model itself becomes a vehicle of transport for that thinking. It becomes a passable tool. People can pass it around. In sales, if you draw a great model, let's say you're having a meeting with the forward scout from a company who's trying to see let's gather the people that we want to have a longer meeting with. And you're the only person that puts some models in front of that forward scout. You're trying to turn them into a salesperson back into the organization. They have a sales tool to take back with them now. Oh, this company has this framework, and they can walk through. It's a transportable, passable container of the idea. It's there's so many levels on this. David, we could probably talk all day. I've got a bunch of other questions, but I'm mindful of your time. I want to be respectful. I'd love to ask some fast questions just for people to get to know you a bit better, and then we'll wrap it up if that's okay. Maybe 2 or 3 fast questions.
No problem.
You're a thinking person. If you could spend a day in the mind of any historical figure, who would it be and why?
I did an interview with Peter Ritchie, and I mentioned him once before, and he somehow or another he brought up, and you won't like the context of it without the context, but he just it was right to talk about it because he was talking about not all communication serves a purpose, and you mentioned that off Hitler. So I'm going to say him to go back and ask him some questions. Say, have you thought this through? So that'll do. I mean, just to go, the carnage that created, or some of the great personalities, like the people that have inspired and built things, and how they thought, how they developed their thinking processes, like an Albert Einstein, great mathematician, or Socrates, or
Well,
some of the Greek philosophers. I mean, those Greek philosophers,
yeah,
they were thinkers. But
yeah.
how these people like Aristotle, how did they come up with the stuff they did?
Yeah.
Like, I would have been fascinated having, an Uzo
Yeah, yeah.
with some of these guys.
Well, I think you raise an interesting point. I mean, history is littered with people that have created enormous movements, some wonderful and some completely destructive.
Yeah, absolutely.
And which means they've all been able to lead at a really effective level. And the interesting conversation for me would be, well, what was the processing behind that, in terms of the consequences you're going to create, right?
Well,
And
I
how do
think
you rationalize and justify?
the net benefit for everybody, like what the best, you actually, if you have a leader with no integrity, you're in deep shit,
Yeah,
right? So,
absolutely.
if you can be, it starts and ends with integrity. Like, if you don't have no integrity, I hope you're not a good leader,
Yeah,
right? Because you're going to lead us into all sorts of ways.
yeah,
You can be a great communicator, but without integrity, we're all screwed.
yeah, yeah. It's yeah, and that is actually the simplest articulation of that. So I just got one other question actually, because we've spent a bit of useful time on the historical figure. If you could solve one unanswered question right now in the world, what would you want to solve?
World peace. And I think that again comes back to capital allocation,
Interesting.
because there's so much land in the world, and all these companies are like countries. So countries are like companies. They're saying, we need to make a profit. We need to be better than you. Our product, we need to have more value, more this, more that. But my philosophy is, you put your people first, or your customers first. Your people are close second. The stakeholders win. Like and most importantly, the owners win. So your country wins if you put other people first, right? So getting people to reinvent the concept of, do I need everything now, or do I need to have security and the building real innovative, real ability to communicate, understand where people are coming from, and having real experts in. When I read that book Ray Dalio wrote, called Principles, I thought, I'm gonna write him an open letter, and say, dude, come and be the #1 ticket holder for Australia. Come and run us. Like, you articulate great principles, great models, great. You get history, and you're not repeats. You get like merit-based decision makers, like just. And as my eldest daughter says, people just need to stop being a dick. Like, be nice to people, make it a better place. That world peace part for me, aspirational. One day, hopefully,
Yeah,
we all need to learn to live with each other.
yeah, we do. Otherwise, we'll destroy each other.
Yeah, absolutely.
It really is that simple. So, David, thank you so much for the time you've spent with us. I have a really simple challenge for anyone listening to this, whether you're a startup, early stage, growth phase, maybe even decline in business and wanting to figure out how to arrest that and bring it back again. Everyone can be an entrepreneur and has the opportunity to be an entrepreneur, but that challenges us all to be leaders. And that means we need to be able to do something that's valuable. Customers, we need to be able to engage people and have them want to really contribute in their best version of themselves, culture. And we need to be able to manage the capital allocation, the resources, cash, and get rate return on that. And so there's a lot of practical things that we've covered over the journey of this episode. A lot of under the surface sort of things. You need to have great mental models. You need to be a phenomenal communicator and influencer. But David, probably the place for us to end is, if you are an entrepreneurial business leader, start with integrity. Start with the notion that if we aren't good to each other, we'll destroy each other. And every company should be a noble enterprise. Business is the most powerful force for good on the planet, so long as the right people are leading them. And every business should be a noble enterprise. So David, thank you so much for giving us your time and wisdom. I look forward to another chat where we can geek out on models together.
Thanks so much for having me, Simon. It's been an absolute pleasure, and thanks for everyone for listening.
Pleasure to have you here. Thank you.